conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. On today's show, we'll be digging into the Democrats in the central Kentucky area stage an interesting protest/event where they supposedly invited Andy Barr to an event, and then they held an event with like 1,000 people there, but he didn't show, to generate some pretty misleading headlines. And the same thing in the aftermath, I think some of the Republicans are going a little too far in their defense of Andy Barr. As far as the claims that they're making, we'll have that. Then also Beshear Vetoes House Bill 495. He puts out a video message in the veto, but then also at the same time, quite frankly, we'll dig into that conversion therapy side of things that is in the 495 bill, but also Herald Leader political reporter Austin Horn brings up some aspects of 495 that he says the LGBTQ activists are more worried about. We'll follow up with that. Then finally, I'm going to weigh in on a story that's been really around the media a lot, but there has been a whole lot of, I guess you'd say, liberal viewpoints on this, or people who are actively out to get Matt Bevin in this issue regarding his adopted son, Jonah. I'm going to weigh in on this a little bit differently. It'll probably be one of my more controversial segments because I've been reading the stories, been following along, and not only do I have some questions, but I'm starting to get a viewpoint of a timeline that I think is more accurate than the story the media is portraying on this. And quite frankly, well, you'll just have to hear my take on it, but I think the Bevins are getting a little bit of a bad rap here. To say the least. So we'll dig into that unfortunate story. It's just an unfortunate story in general, but we'll go through that today too as well. So we'll have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before I dig down into it, please make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe. Make sure you're tuning in and listening to every episode of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. If you're watching this on social media, whether that's like Twitter or Facebook, if you want to listen to it in a more convenient format, you can head over to theandrewshow.com/listen and check out all the other places you can tune into the Andrew Cooperrider Show podcast format. Same thing goes for you all listening on the radio or TV. You can head over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab, and see all the other places where you can tune in case you will miss a bit. You want to listen to old episodes, you have that ability there. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So Andy Barr had gotten a little flack, I guess, in the headlines. So as I understand, the Democrats put on an event that he was supposedly supposed to show up to. I guess they invited him, and he never even responded to it, but they still billed the event as Andy Barr was going to show up to it. Now, understand, the Democrats around the nation have been targeting Republicans at their town halls. What they've realized is when they couldn't get, 1 million women or 600,000 men and women to march in Washington with Trump's next go-around, that their attacks need to be a little bit more local. And so they decided to kind of ramp up their local machines in order to draw people in. Now, Andy Barr says that this event was funded and people were paid to be there. I don't know if that's true or not. What goes on with, I believe, the liberal activist sides of things that needs to be talked about more isn't as much that they're paying people to show up at things. It's not that. It's that there is a lot of money behind the organization putting on these kinds of events, whether that's from Democrat donors kind of funneling money this way and that. I've said this before, the Democrat Party does a better job of working with their grassroots and allowing them to fund those groups to actually do things, direct funding into these groups to get things accomplished on the grassroots level that otherwise the parties themselves can't do. And so in this case, they're able to funnel that money into developing lists. Okay. So for an example, if you've ever filled out a change.org petition, your information then gets forwarded. Change.org is in part at least owned by George Soros, and then that data can be dispersed now. Those emails, those contacts info can be then dispersed out to these groups or used in Soros-funded organizations to drive then people to an event, to create the email list and things. So you got like Moms Demand Action. That's a gun control advocacy group. They get a lot of money from Democrat donors, but that in turn develops lists. And then when they have these events, they can send out pushes in that direction. Same with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. That's another common Democrat grassroots group here in Kentucky, liberal group. And they're technically a nonprofit or whatever in some degrees. Some other degrees, they have some political arms to them. But they can bring in that money and then use that money to build up contact lists, email lists, petition drives. They'll go out and knock doors for silly things to get people to sign, give them their phone numbers, give them their emails. So then when they go turn around and put on these events, they can send that out and get a lot of people in. So it's not as much that they're quote unquote paid to be there, but more so that the money's being used in a data operation to be able to spread the word quickly. And Democrats have invested a lot of time and money into this. And that's because, once again, they work with their grassroots. I've gone into why Republicans won't work with their grassroots, and in large part it has to do with the fact that, quite frankly, Republican grassroots want a smaller, less intrusive government. And while the Republicans may run on that, that isn't what they actually want. So a lot of times the party isn't willing to work with the grassroots the same way Democrats are, because what Democrats' grassroots want is government to solve all their problems. Well, that lines up well if you're somebody who wants a bigger government, which is what the Democrats want. So anyway, so they hold this event, and they've got a sign out there that says Andy Barr's supposed to be here, and of course, Andy Barr doesn't show. Why would he show to a Democrat event put on? And so instead it turned into, I guess, a speaking event for some of the local elected people and everything else, which is what it was always supposed to be. And the reason why they're targeting this district so much has to do with, quite frankly, some of what's going on with our Senate race. So we see that Andy Barr quite clearly is eyeing up that race for the Senate, which will now leave the 6th congressional district as a non-incumbent district. And to remind you of how vulnerable this district is. Now, granted, it's been redistricted to make it a bit more conservative, but if we rewind to the last Trump term, midterm election, when Andy Barr was an incumbent, now, granted, he was up against Amy McGrath, who was very well-funded, he only got 51% of the vote. And if Democrats are smart, they're actually going to, I think, focus more attention on the 6th congressional seat that will become open than they would the Senate race. Because the last time we had a Democrat senator in the state was, 99 with Wendell Ford, right? I believe so, yeah. 99 with Wendell Ford. And then, but when we look at the 6th congressional district, literally we just had to rewind to 2012. Sounds like a long time ago, but that's really only 12 years ago compared with 25 years ago. And we see Ben Chandler had that. He was defeated by Andy Barr, but we see Ben Chandler had that seat. And then when we see once again that in a 2018 election where it was Barr versus Amy McGrath, Barr once again only took 51% of the vote. So it leaves that opportunity for in an open seat election. They have a better chance of winning the 6th congressional seat than they do winning something like the Senate seat that's statewide. I think that's why they're going to be targeting that district specifically. It's a chance to pick up a Democrat congressional seat for them. But also I think something that is important to note here is now Republicans in response are going over the top, pretending because Andy Barr's being attacked because he's not talking to constituents. That's what they're saying. That's what the claim is about this event. However, Andy Barr's defenders are saying, well, Andy Barr's great at dealing with his constituents and he's always available to them and as such. Now, I know a few Republicans in the district that certainly would disagree with that sentiment and would not be on the bandwagon that Andy Barr has great constituent services. He's somewhat vindictive in a way. Politically, he's known as that, being the type of person to exact revenge. Heavy-handed tactics going on as far as shoring up his support, as I'm being told, calling up people saying either you're with me or you're against me, and demanding their loyalties right now before even he's declared. But it is just worth noting that I would not say that Andy Barr is fantastic when it comes to constituent services. And he does speak at a lot of events, granted. Doesn't really take a lot of questions at said events. As I've witnessed, the events I've been to probably at least a dozen. And he doesn't typically take questions at those events. But regardless, it is an interesting move by the Democrats. So coming up after this, we'll be digging into Andy Beshear's veto on House Bill 495. We'll have that after this short break. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Andy Beshear, he vetoed House Bill 495. He actually did it, I guess, at a fairness campaign dinner. The fairness campaign's an LGBTQ advocacy group. They mainly push these things called fairness ordinances, which is to say, actually, to extend the kind of civil rights protections that are afforded to, race and gender, to push those onto LGBTQ beliefs. Obviously, that runs into some conflict when it comes to religious rights and religious beliefs, as you're dealing with things like the cake baker shop or some of these other aspects. And the fairness campaign kind of falls into that category. But I guess he was at a dinner there, and he did a veto. He did shoot a video in typical Andy Beshear fashion, which, can we pause here for a second? And this is frustrating for me because I know my tax dollars are funding people to staff Andy Beshear's office. And I'm sure some of those roles and responsibilities are media relations, and they're meant to make Andy Beshear look good. But he has been doing recently these videos where he's just got his camera held so close to his face, like hold it a little bit farther away, but he'll hold it so close and it's like angled badly, and he's like shooting this video. And I think he thinks they're endearing. And there's a way to shoot these selfies in a way that's maybe if you're trying to get the personal feel, so you don't want somebody to hold the camera and record it. But you can work on getting better angles of how you hold the phone. Maybe hold it up higher, hold it here, whatever. There's better ways to do this, the recording, and also too, to get a better quality camera. I don't know what phone he's using, but please get the man a better quality camera phone, or maybe he's just got too much grease over the lenses and things. He needs to clean the lenses, because they just are some of the worst quality videos. And I'm saying this as somebody who shoots videos. I record selfies. I've done it before, selfie videos. And there's just, frankly, this looks awful. And considering you have people paid probably enormous salaries, all considering, on your staff that are supposed to make you look good, and you keep putting out these horrible looking videos, just drives me up a wall. Because while I don't like Andy Beshear, the fact that we're paying people to fulfill this job for him, and they're failing so much, either it means that his office, people are so afraid, and I know I'm going on a big tangent about just him shooting these videos, but they bother me a lot. The fact that either people are so afraid of him that they're not willing to tell him, look, buddy, you look awful in these videos. We need to change up your angles. Let's work on your lighting a little bit better. Let's make sure you just look as best you can, instead of these up the nostril, too close to your head videos. Maybe zoom out your camera. Let's get you a different camera that can zoom out, or something along those lines. Instead of having that conversation with him, they're either too afraid to do it, or they're too incompetent to do it. So either he's hiring bad people, or people are so afraid of him that they're not willing to let him know of this very valuable feedback that would make him look 10 times better. I don't know which it is, but it is worth mentioning. But regardless, so he records this video. Let's go ahead and take a listen to it.
Hey everybody, it's Andy. I'm in an elevator leaving the fairness dinner here in Louisville. I just vetoed the House bill that attempted to overturn my ban on conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is torture on our kids, and no one should ever want to have to subject a kid to something like that. To everybody out there, you're perfect just the way you are. You keep being you.
So there he's talking about his veto on House Bill 495. Now, there's something else in the bill that he didn't mention there, but first we're going to talk about the conversion therapy side of that bill. So to give you some background here, this past year, Andy Beshear issued an executive order trying to ban conversion therapy in Kentucky. Now, conversion therapy, when you hear it, a lot of people think, oh man, this sounds like an awful thing. They use the term to invoke the idea that people are literally doing like electroshock therapy to gay people to make them straight. or doing things like showing them pornography or things like that to make them straight. And a lot of times that's not what's going on. Those things have long been debunked, and you can consider those things also to be bad without banning the concept of conversion therapy, which is simply banning the idea that if you decide you want to walk into a therapist's office and you are somebody who's identified themselves as a homosexual before, and you come in saying, I don't want to be gay anymore, the therapist is not allowed to treat you for that. These executive orders would make it to where you're not allowed to change, quote unquote, change a person's sexuality. Now, of course, it's funny that it can go one way but not the other way. But regardless, you're not allowed to change a person's sexuality. And the idea that you can be somebody who's been gay, homosexual, done homosexual acts, and then now but not somehow end up a healthy, happy, straight individual would mean that we would have to have no cases ever of anybody having gay behaviors and then ending up in straight, healthy relationships and saying, you know what, that was a mistake. I was confused. I had problems. I was dealing with issues. That is not what I needed to do, and I needed to change my behavior. But there are tons of stories about that. I know of stories regarding a person who I used to go to church with. And he was a gay man, actually even got AIDS from being and engaging in homosexual behavior. And then fast forward, and he's a straight man in a marriage. He ended up going in remission, but he's a straight man in a marriage and happy and not engaging in those kinds of behaviors. Now, the LGBTQ activists would say he's just lying to himself. He's denying his behavior. He's not living to his true self. But in the same way to say that, when it comes to, and this is just me talking as a Christian, while I may not deal with those kinds of sexual, I guess you'd call them desires or proclivities or struggle with that particular sin, we all have our own sins that we deal with, that we're all born to want to do, whether that is moving away from homosexual sex to premarital sex. That's a sin. And many people struggle with having premarital sex. That doesn't change the fact it's not a sin. It doesn't change the fact you were born to naturally be attracted to the opposite sex and want to enjoy congress with them as far as that goes. But that same idea that you resist those urges because that's what God calls you to do in a lot of ways, and I think that's the breakdown, is that Christians also believe you were born with the desire to engage in behaviors in straight relationships as well before marriage. But you're supposed to push those back because that's what you're commanded to do. But regardless of all that, if you are struggling with that, you're not allowed to come in and ask for help from it. You can't even seek the care you're looking for. That's a step too far. But the other thing conversion therapy is now brought into play, and they've wrapped up in with them, is this idea that making a person who is identifying themselves as transgender to now no longer be transgender. So if you come in and you say, I think I'm a girl, and you're a guy, this would ban you from being able to say, you're not a girl, you're a man, you have, male chromosomes, you were born a man, you are a man, that is your body. Let's work on how we make you comfortable in your own skin without giving you hormones, without pumping you full of drugs, without cutting off body parts. How do we make you happy how you are now? Banning conversion therapy, because now they've wrapped that in. It used to be just the LGBTQ stuff, but now they've wrapped in the transgender stuff. And now the claim is I guess detransitioning would now become, with conversion therapy laws in place, detransitioning becomes essentially illegal. You can't, if you decide you're a guy who's now a girl, and then you go in and say, you know what, I'm so unhappy, I think I should be a guy. You're not allowed as a therapist to say, that's because you were born a guy and you should have never done this, but we'll work on it. Let's get you back to being healthy and happy in your own skin. Not allowed to do that. So the legislature took steps to say, look, this is wrong, this is incorrect, and passed a law protecting so-called conversion therapy, undoing Beshear's executive order. So obviously he has vetoed that. But there was another part of the bill that Beshear's pretty mum about. He's not talking about it. It deals with the provision that was added onto it last minute that banned Medicaid paying for gender-affirming care. Now, this is from Austin Horn. He had posted about the veto message here, and he says, in comments in this veto message, Governor Andy Beshear is focused on conversion therapy aspect of House Bill 495. As I understand it, LGBTQ advocates are generally more concerned about the Medicaid won't pay for gender-affirming care. Hormones are the main concern, portion. Now, that's interesting, that the LGBTQ activists are actually, they're less concerned about conversion therapy, which is fascinating to me that, they wouldn't be as concerned about that, because I guess their thought is that, well, a lot of therapists don't do it anyways. We've already captured so much of the therapy side of things regardless, that instead they're concerned about the fact that the taxpayer wouldn't be no longer paying for them to transition their gender, which is an interesting point to consider when we go over when this bill passed and we see Democrats claiming that this never happened. That in fact that we weren't paying for a lot of people to be on Medicaid and getting gender transition surgeries. This is a small, minute amount of the population. However, apparently that message didn't get through to Beshear, who slipped up. Somebody from his office slipped up. They sent a message to Josh Calloway going over just how many are on Medicaid, which prompted the fact that this bill needed to be passed, because they sent them how many people are on Medicaid receiving these gender-affirming cares at the cost of the taxpayer. And I'm sure Beshear was pretty upset about it. And when he saw how that played out, he wants to now distance himself from it. So we'll go over exactly what that message was and go over exactly what House Bill 495 does on the Medicaid won't pay for gender-affirming care. And then we'll be digging into that Bevin story after this short break. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So I was going over House Bill 495. Beshear has vetoed it. It's the bill that stopped his conversion therapy executive order that got added on the Medicaid won't pay for gender-affirming care portion of the bill there kind of last minute. Is going over how Beshear, he'll talk about the conversion therapy because he thinks that plays well. He thinks that that invokes the images of homosexuals being held down and tortured in order to make them straight, pray the gay away or what have you. He thinks that plays well. Because according to polling data, those things do. People are against those things. I would be against the idea of torturing gay people to make them straight. I would think that's wrong as well. So, of course, that plays well. And listen, for all the foibles of Democrats, they do a great job of redefining things and preying on people to get them to support things that otherwise they wouldn't. And to cast and change and use words like conversion therapy or gender-affirming care and make them mean things that would be counterintuitive to what the general populace would think. But he's ignoring the Medicaid won't pay for gender-affirming care because obviously Beshear's eyeing up that presidential run, and he doesn't want to be on the record talking about the fact that he is, he's for taxpayers paying for the transitions of adults on Medicaid because we saw what happened. When we look back at the presidential election, we see that the most effective Trump ad by many polling data was the they-them ad where Trump was targeting Harris's support for transgender people being considered exactly the same as men or exactly the same as women, specifically too, in this whole men competing in women's sports. That plays really bad. And so this whole, not as much transgenders as a whole, but the idea of government, one, men playing against women in sports, that's a bad thing, but then also now taxpayers paying for gender transitioning. That is something that the American people take issue with. American people also take issue with transgender people serving in the military as well, because I think there is at the same time, I think the American people think, look, it's not my thing. I wouldn't cross-dress and chop off body parts and take hormones and all those other things. But, I mean, you live your life, I guess. But I can acknowledge the fact that while you may say you're really a woman, I know you're a dude. So you're not going to, that's a mental illness, not super healthy. The surgeries, those have cost to him. Obviously, you wouldn't be effective in the military in that way. Obviously, playing against women as a man in those sports, that's unfair. But otherwise, if I'm not paying for it, leave well enough alone. And Beshear doesn't want to be on the record supporting that, even though the LGBTQ activists and advocates are more worried about not having their drugs paid for because, of course, according to the Beshear campaign, there's between and this was according to a message he sent to Josh Callaway's, his administration did, when he offered this as a standalone bill. They said the fiscal impact of this would affect 10 to 15,000 Medicaid recipients, meaning the taxpayers were paying for the gender transitioning of 10 to 15,000 Kentuckians. And those are 10 to 15,000 people now that the LGBTQ advocates, and many of them probably fall into that category, well, they won't be getting their cross-sex drugs paid for anymore, and they're pretty upset about that. So that is certainly interesting, just that Beshear's veering so far away from that. It just goes to show, too, how much this whole trans thing has become a weight around the neck of Democrats. Well, moving on now, I want to talk about Matt Bevin and his son, Jonah. So for those of you who are unaware, there's been this rigmarole going on. It all started when this Jamaican troubled child camp got shut down because they were abusing the children. And then Jonah, who was 17 at the time, was taken in by the Jamaican officials there, and the Bevins didn't come pick him up, and he ended up, turning 18 and going into a teen home, and turning 18 now he's an adult, kind of out there. But they never really picked him up or took care of him afterwards, and that created this story cycle where now we're getting into Jonah now suing the Bevins, claiming filing EPOs against them, trying to sue them, and trying to press charges against them for child abandonment. And it's interesting to take a look at how this story occurred, because you have this story happen regarding the Jamaican shutdown. One of the kids happens to be the governor's adopted son. Now, Matt Bevin has, I believe, a total of 8 children, and 4 of them are adopted children, and the 4 adopted children are all from Africa. And so what we've gotten from the media headlines, you just read the headlines, you read the comments, you just glance through the stories, but you don't really look deeper, is that the Bevins are no good, horrible people that were abusing this child. And of course that plays into the leftist thoughts that, they don't want to like Matt Bevin because he was a Republican governor, and they just don't like Republicans. So it plays in a lot of ways for them. However, I'm going to be the first person, I think, to really publicly give a different version of this story. I'll see some comments from people occasionally and be like, something's not adding up here. Something's fishy. Quietly, people have talked to me and been like, this is a really weird story when you start to read it. And there's a lot that is not adding up from the Jonah side of things and the claims being made. But nobody's really kind of fully, I guess, defended the Bevins. And I wouldn't say this is necessarily a defense, but I'm reading between the lines here, and I'm not seeing the same story everybody else is. So first, let's start off with this WHAS story. They were the first ones in the Louisville area to I guess, interview Jonah. Let's listen to this one part of the story. Let's go ahead and take a listen here.
Adoptive father, did he threaten you?
Yes, he has threatened me before. He said some interesting things to me, like I could take your life away, but not necessarily as in like, I'm gonna kill you. It's more like I can ruin you. I can ruin who you are,
Jonah, back in the U.S. and now homeless since he turned 18 late last year, wants his adoptive father criminally prosecuted. He talked to me just days after securing an emergency protective order against the former governor, whose attorney didn't respond to my request for comment. Glenna Bevin's attorney didn't call me back either.
This is Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin.
And I'm First Lady Glenna Bevin.
Matt Bevin and his wife frequently feature Jonah and their 3 other adopted Ethiopian kids in the public eye.
And just because it's always fun to do, Damn the man.
Telling KET in 2017 that reforming Kentucky's adoption system was the main reason he ran for governor. Jonah seen here on stage when Bevin won in the 2015 election, and again in this campaign ad during Bevin's re-election bid.
You don't force those kids that have trauma to be on a stage and on spotlight 24/7. You can't do that to them.
Children's rights attorney Dawn Post has worked with Jonah.
His life was taken away by being sent to programs.
So in that section, he says that Bevin hasn't threatened him physically. He tells the story of Bevin saying, I could in your life, and who knows what context that is, because, context isn't offered. But even Jonah there says that he didn't mean kill him. He didn't mean physically harm him. He meant, in other words, end his life or make his life hard or difficult. And I want to point out who's sitting next to Jonah. Now, those of you listening to the audio format didn't see the woman sitting next to him. I'm going to do the best job I can of describing her. She's multicolored, short hair. She's about in her... If I said there was like a 50-year-old leftist at an LGBTQ rally... the quintessential, I guess as J.D. Vance would call them, childless cat lady types, advocate, LGBTQ advocate. If I was to tell you to imagine that person in your mind, you would arrive at this individual, and rightfully so, because that's exactly what she is. I'm going to go into exactly who this woman is and why this immediately, when I saw this and I started looking at who that woman was, threw up a lot of red flags for me on this story may not be on its face as factual or as straightforward as the media maybe is portraying it. We'll have that after this short break. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider show, final segment here. So I was talking about the Matt Bevin and Jonah Bevin story. I believe his last name is still Bevin. Jonah story. And, once again, I'm saying the story. I'm not going to pretend for a second like I have talked to the Bevins at all about this. I didn't call up Matt. I wasn't like, hey, Matty, what's going on with this? That didn't happen at all. I am literally getting this information by reading the same news stories everybody else is and then doing a little bit of digging and piecing it together. Now, granted, I used to do sales. And in a prior world, I was a pretty accomplished salesman, sales manager. And one of the major teachers to me in sales was Zig Ziglar. And listening to his audiobooks and everything else. And one of the things he talked about when it came to sales, and this is carried over into my political thought process, is that reasonable people, equally informed, seldom disagree. And the idea in sales was that if you're a reasonable person who believes that this individual should buy this product, then all you need to do is inform the other person up to your level, and then you guys would agree that they should buy the product. That's the idea and thought process. In politics, though, I've kind of taken it to mean that people's beliefs about a subject or beliefs on a standpoint is all shaped by their personal individual experiences and information they have up to that point. And politics and campaigning and winning people to your viewpoint is all an information process where you're trying to share with them the information you want them to have to arrive at the same conclusion that they have drawn. And so if you want to look at a conclusion the media is coming to or wants you to come to, you got to look at what information aren't they giving you. And one of the things when I look at that WHAS interview was the woman sitting next to him, which throughout the newscast, they don't really reference. And that woman is a woman that goes by the name of Dawn J. Post, okay? Dawn J. Post. And Dawn J. Post is a lawyer, but also is a journalist and writes for The Lantern. I think she writes for, the Wall Street Journal or somewhere else. And she's also an LGBTQ advocate, a child's rights advocate. And so she's just a quintessential leftist. I looked at her website. Like I said, she seems like a childless cat lady. Based on her photos, I think she's a childless dog lady. She does have a dog instead of a cat, I guess. But anyways, multicolored hair. She's like 60. She's got these arm tattoos. Not saying there's anything against per se arm tattoos. I have arm tattoos. But anyways, and she's an LGBTQ advocate, and she's out of New York. And I think that is an interesting point, that this is clearly a politically motivated woman. And so this story breaks, and then it seems like this woman has come to him. That's just what it seems like to me, and has gotten him to, and is using him to forward this story. Because even in that newscast we listened to in the last segment, we hear Jonah say that Matt Bevin hasn't physically harmed him. In fact, Glenda Bevin, keep in mind the Bevins are going through a divorce right now, but the attorney for her, which is asked during his closed questioning that happened in court here recently over the emergency protective order about it being permanently instated, asked, because it's filed against Glenda Bevin and Matt Bevin, asked specifically, has Glenda Bevin threatened you in any way or been violent with you or really even seen you within the past year? And the teen replied she had not. So we have him in that newscast saying that Bevin hasn't physically threatened him at all. And we have him admitting on the stand that Glenda Bevin also hasn't threatened him at all. So it leads to the question of why was this EPO filed for, or more importantly, why was it even granted in the first place if this wasn't political? Because nobody in here, Jonah's not even alleging physical harm. Now, Matt Bevin went on to represent himself. Of course, the leftists claim that it's because he's a narcissist or whatever, or this is awful or horrible. Everybody has a right to defend themselves. And in this case, for this particular hearing, Bevin uses lawyers elsewhere. I'm sure it was just, hey, look, I can ask these questions. I know this information better than anybody else. This is a quick case. Having to brief a lawyer to get him up to speed on this would be a little bit more difficult. I feel confident I can just ask him about this. So that seems reasonable. I mean, sometimes you would want to get an attorney, but if you feel pretty confident, I can tell you when it comes to a lot of different courts, family courts especially, people tend to represent themselves because it is just hard to get a lawyer to understand all the nooks and crannies. You got to remember, you have years of background information, and passing it on to an attorney can be pretty difficult. So Bevin represents himself and asked him a few questions too as well about what occurred, and it definitely seems that the kid even admits that he was a troubled kid, he was acting out, and he was badly behaved. Also, what came up in the court hearing was that Jonah was unfortunately sexually abused by a 17-year-old when he was 10. And he said he did not believe his adopted parents took enough action afterwards, which is an odd claim. I mean, it's awful that any of this ever happens, but it's an odd claim because he says he did see a therapist afterwards, but he didn't want to continue going to the therapist because he believed the therapist was relaying information he'd said in privacy to Matt and Glenda Bevin. And then while being questioned by Glenda's attorney, Jonas admits that the assault was reported to the police for prosecution. So the Bevins sent him to therapy and referred it over to the police. They didn't protect this 17-year-old that sexually assaulted him when he was 10. They filed with the police and took him to a therapist. And as unfortunate of a situation as it is, I don't know what else you want parents to do. Then, as I said, you have the kid admit he was acting very badly, he was acting out, and there was an incident that occurred at the Bevins' home that resulted in him being arrested. They said a confrontation that resulted in Jonah Bevin being arrested, which is interesting to say the least. It definitely could indicate that it was a violent altercation to end up with a 13-year-old being arrested. And then after he was arrested for getting those confrontations, he was then sent away to these camps and everything else. So you have a kid who you adopted, and you didn't adopt him as a young child, as like a baby. He was older than a toddler, it looks like, when he was adopted. He was unfortunately sexually assaulted at 10, and now you have him getting into situations inside the home that are resulting in him being arrested, which indicates it could possibly be a physical altercation. Now, keep in mind, if you're the Bevins, you got 7 other kids, I believe, at home. Your wife is there too. If you're Matt Bevin, you got your wife and 7 other kids, and you have this 13-year-old child that is getting into confrontations resulting in arrests. What do you do for this child? You've tried therapists and he was refusing to go. You have him being arrested. You're trying to help him as best you can. Your only options here, and I'm saying I'm a parent. And I think a lot of parents in this situation, who put yourselves in these situations like this one, you have an adopted child, you can't just return him. It's not like a dog you got at the pound that ends up being a biter or something. You can't return him. You've adopted this child. You need to take care of him. But you have to also worry about now the safety of the rest of your family potentially. So what do? They send him to behavior camps and schools that, are meant for children like this, to keep a watch on them, to check in their behavior, make sure they get their education. That's what they're supposed to do. Now, the Jamaican school that he ends up at, I'm sure they weren't telling him, hey, look, we're over here, we're waterboarding children, as Jonah claims that they were doing, and we're torturing children. I'm sure the Bevins weren't told that would be what would happen at these schools. I'm sure they weren't. But they're looking at saying, we're out of options. What do we do here? So send the kid away to a school. Hopefully he gets better. He's not getting better. You send him to other ones because these are your choices. And now the place gets shut down and you have this 17-year-old kid that obviously was going through issues as a child, that something was going on to lead to him needing to be adopted, whether he didn't have family around him in an orphanage. I don't know the full backstory. You have an unfortunate sexual assault at 10. You have arrested at 13 for a confrontation inside the home. Now you have him getting, abused at a camp that didn't tell you this would be what would be going on. And he's now 17, months away from being 18, and you're going through a divorce with your wife. What do you do with the child? I don't think necessarily just abandoning him was the correct move, per se, in Jamaica. Maybe helping him get back to the States, and I don't know. I mean, you're worried about him being violent with your other children, with you. So Bevin then, I guess in an attempt to help him, says, you know what, we figured out your mother actually, your biological mother's actually alive. We thought she was dead. You thought she was dead. We were told she was dead. We found out she's alive. I would love to send you back to Africa to meet her. And you have to think, I mean, as a parent, as a person in the situation, nothing else has worked. This kid's had an awful, horrible life. You've done the best you can, in your mind at least. Maybe, backseat quarterbacking, you could say, no, you could have done this better or this better. But you've done the best you can in your mind. You think, well, maybe meeting your biological mother will help. Maybe having that conversation. Asking her why you were left in an orphanage because she didn't die, it would seem. So I'll pay for you to go there. And then he was advised then by an individual. He says, I believe it was this J Post when this reach out happened, that she didn't like this situation. He wasn't given enough information, so he turned it down. And so Matt Bevin responded by saying, well, you've just given up your only chance to meet your biological mother. Now, Bevin says he's going to provide the communications on this side of things to the courts so they can see exactly how this whole trip to Africa played out, because they're trying to cast it as if he was trying to maybe get rid of Jonah permanently, sending him away to Africa and getting rid of him so that way he would stop being a liability to the Bevins. I don't know. So what I do know is I look at this situation and you know what, you could say I'm being too charitable, and I may either look like a Nostradamus savant when this all plays out and we find out that the side of the story is very much different. What played out is very much different than what Jonah and his activist lawyer friend is proposing. Or I could look absolutely ridiculous for defending a man who, not even a man, defending a family in a way, for saying, look, they were in some pretty hard situations here as far as trying to figure out what to do. I do say this probably plays into, you got to think, when we look back at Bevin's pardons, he issued some pardons to some people that really raised some eyebrows. And you wonder if this idea of him dealing with this frustration of the problems with his son and seeing that playing out and seeing what his future would hold plays into those pardons, where he was able to make some issues for some families go away at the stroke of a pen while he was dealing with his own issues that he was hoping he could solve with just a stroke of a pen. I do wonder, though, as we look at these people who supposedly care so much about Jonah, and as such, you know, this Don J. Post looks like a crazy leftist, seems like a crazy leftist, who's possibly using this as an opportunity to make it a political stance for her. It may be all about politics in order to get at the Republican governor dad, play it up, make them look bad, make Republicans look bad in Kentucky. And now it looks to me like poor Jonah is just getting used and manipulated by the left to attack Bevin when, you know, if a lot of these things occurred, you might say would be more healthy for him would be no contact. But instead, they're, in a way, kind of making him go through all this because they want to score political points. That's what it looks like to me. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys disagree with me, reach out. You can email me, info@theandrewshow.com, or comment on this video on social media. Let me know what you think. But y'all, that's what we got time for. Hope you have a great rest of your day.